Well, greetings, you curious Herle Burlyites. We're getting right to the pod today because cabinet ministers are busy people, especially so when the cabinet minister in question has responsibilities for not one, but two portfolios. The Honourable Randy Boissonnault is our guest today. First elected as a member of Parliament for Edmonton Centre in 2015, Mr. Boissonnault is the Minister of Tourism and the Associate Minister of Finance. He is also Canada's Special Advisor to the Prime Minister on LGBTQ2 issues. As a graduate of the University of Alberta, he went on to study at the University of Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. I turned that down, lowbrow. Minister Boissonnault is also a successful entrepreneur, community leader, and philanthropist with a strong record of leadership in business, public service, and the not-for-profit sector. So that's where we're going to start. We'll find out a little bit more about the minister's personal story today, and then we're going to have a deep dive into last week's budget. And since he's one of only two Liberal MPs from Alberta, we'll talk Alberta politics for a while. Minister, thanks for finding time in your busy schedule to do this today. I know it took some doing, and I really appreciate you working things around to get here to talk to us.
David, it's a pleasure. And look, I know you have a long and storied past in political circles. And my biggest nervousness with coming on your show is you've had Jonathan Wilkinson here. You've had Seamus O'Regan here. And look, I will say this if he's in the room. Jonathan is not known for his comedy awards. And yet Seamus O'Regan, he could literally crack up a convention of monks. So I hope I'm somewhere in the middle of those two bookends.
Everything works. Just be yourself. I want to start, though. Sure. I just need to understand. I don't know if you can see my shirt, but I wore it deliberately for you because it's a Rough Rider shirt. And I wear a Rough Rider shirt every time I'm going to be talking to somebody from Edmonton because I fucking hate the Edmonton Eskimos, and you can change the name to Elks if you want, and I still hate them just as much. The only person that ever hated those Edmonton football teams more than me was my brother Vern, and he lived in Edmonton. Anyway, so go Riders and screw the Elks.
You know, I'm getting smack talk everywhere I go today because I was at the Kelowna Chamber today and the chair of the board he takes off his jacket before he goes up. I'm like, what the heck's this all about? He pulls out his Canucks jersey.
Oh, yeah?
And introduce me. So I had to get up there and make a comment about McDavid and make a comment about Go Oilers. But look, I was in Regina making a $6 million tourism announcement to a whole bunch of things. And Tim Reed.
Oh my, let's not get into that.
No. He gets up.
You're not going to show me your Regina, are you, Randy?
I'm going to show you that we have lots of tourism in the whole ecosystem. And you know what he does? He puts up on the Jumbotron outside in the stadium, "Welcome to Regina, Minister Boissonnault. Always knew you were Riders."
Oh, excellent.
He was having some fun.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm all good with your hockey team this year. They've never broken my heart, and they're super talented, and I hope they do well. Go Oilers. I'm with you.
Go Oilers, man.
Yeah. Hey, what is your story about politics? When and where and how and why did you get interested in politics? I know you ran in 2015, but I know also that you've been a Liberal long before that. How did you get involved?
So it depends how far back you want to go, but I was thinking about this. It started literally, I was 11 years old. It was grade 5, and I didn't like how the other kids were spending the bake sale money. So I ran to be the treasurer at grade 5 so that I could direct the money where I thought it should go. And then grade 6, they had me do
not on those big McKinsey consultants that those kids were spending that bake sale money on.
It was maybe we had $500 to spend in the whole year, but in let me do the math, 1981 or something. And so anyway, I went to grade 7 to 12 high school, got involved the whole way through, beat the grade 12 presidential candidate in grade 11 and was student union president 2 years. And then the first time I got onto the U of A campus, David, I saw this place and I'm like, what would it be like to be president here? They have a whole building. Anyway, it was for me about making decisions for my community because I thought that, I could not necessarily make the decisions better, but take those decisions in a better way. And I'll give you an example because I did get involved at Campus Saint-Jean as first year vice president and then the student that got to the main campus on student council. And then I ran for VP External and won on a great ticket and then ran for president. And I remember going to one of my classes because when you're president back in those days, it's like a full-time gig, right? So I had one course. And I had to cross Students' Union building to get to CAB, the Central Academic Building. And it snowed that morning and all the students were falling over because the pathway had iced over, and anyways, a mess. So I get to cab, and I pick up the phone, and I dial, because there's no cell phones. It's 1992. And I called materials management. I say, hey, it's Randy at the Students' Union. Can you guys just sand the pathway between sub and cab? Because like somebody's going to break an ankle or something, and it's not cool. And I went to my meeting, and I came back. Everybody was using the path. They didn't know that I made that call, but
Right.
that's the job, right? Take care of people and do the right thing. And so I was literally a mayor of 35,000 people, $6.5–7 million budget, 200 staff, 200 staff unionized and non-unionized. And we can talk about that at the bar someday. But it was the first time that I realized if you're going to have services to benefit people, you got to have money to pay for it. So our businesses cash flowed the services. And when I was Students' Union president, we had to shut down Students' Union records because it was losing too much money. And the 80 grand we saved on that hemorrhaging, we put into supports that we could have for students. So that started my political career, but also my business career, because I could see the benefit of both. And then jump forward after, going overseas and doing all that stuff, coming back, coming out, which we can talk about. I ran for office because I didn't like what Stephen Harper was doing to the country. And I could either complain from the sidelines or flip my seat, because Anne McClellan had held that seat from 93 to 2006. It had Liberal DNA, right? And Laurie Hahn held it for 9 years. And then my job was to go as a openly gay, francophone, bald guy to say, hey, what do you think if we flip this seat? And I worked hard at it for a year to get the nomination, 18 months as the candidate, and defying all the odds. We won with 1,201 votes in that year. We can talk about some of this other stuff later.
Did you find that the baldism was a big problem for you?
Somebody gave me cufflinks that said bald and sexy. So I'm like, that's a right. When you get that from somebody in your riding, you've connected in a good way. And look, I lost in 19. And we can talk about some of how that happened on the environment and the economy and all that stuff. But I ran again in 21 because my phone didn't stop ringing. I was bruised for the first year. I went and did stuff. We created the Global Equality Caucus. We created, we did some cool things. I dusted off my consulting firm again. And, but about just before the pandemic started, people started calling me saying, how do we help? How do we get help with the federal government? Like, I got this project. I want this funding. I need this help. And the answer was elect a Liberal, like have somebody in government. Right. We were shut out. We were shut out in the 19 election, right? And so the phone kept ringing and I would do what I could behind the scenes. And then in 2020, I picked up the phone and started calling people to say, look, I'm at 20–30% on this. If I do this, what are you thinking? And I made 200 phone calls, and all of those phone calls came back. If you do it, we're with you. When I got to 100% and made the call and fought the election, and look, it was a narrow thing. We won with 616 votes, over 50-some thousand cast.
But look, it's super interesting, Minister, and let me ask you about it, because in preparation for this interview, I was looking at your electoral results. And well, first of all, they're highly impressive for an Alberta Liberal, I'll tell you that. But what I noticed between 2019 and 2021 was that you lost in 2019, but you won in 2021. Your vote actually went down, maybe less than 1,000 votes, but it went down from 2019 to 2021. The NDP vote went up about 4,000 votes from 2019 to 2021, but the Conservative vote collapsed by 7,000 votes in your riding between 2019 and 2021. What happened to the Conservative vote in your riding?
COVID and the government supports. There was an entire community in the riding of McQueen never voted for me. And I was on the doors. And this woman says, come and have a sit on the porch with me, son. Think about it. It's Alberta. And it's a part of my riding, not so friendly. So look, I went and had a sit with her on a porch, and she said, take a look at the 3 houses to the left of me. Take a look at the 3 houses to the right of me. Take a look at mine. All 7 of these houses would have been gone without your supports. We never voted for you before, but we're voting for you as a block because you saved our block. I heard that from senior citizens. I heard that from business associations. I was on the door with a former reformer, talked to him first, and he asked his wife to come. He said, this guy's telling us he's going to do 50 cents on the dollar daycare and take it down to $10 a day. What do you think? And she said, if he's right, we're voting for him. And you're going to put your reform history behind you and you're voting for this guy. And they did. And when we announced those childcare benefits within a month of forming government, he wrote me a letter. And his name is Mike. And his wife is Laura. And they said, we can't believe you did it so fast. You kept your word. You've got our vote for the future. So COVID was a big part of it, how we treated people. I mean, I had conservatives, David, say to me, just let it ride. If it's 100,000 businesses that fail, that's the market. If people are on the streets, that's the way it's going to be. I could not have imagined the decisions that my colleagues made during that time to avoid the greatest depression since the 1930s. Like, we're talking suicides, we're talking breadlines, we're talking devastating consequences. And so the Prime Minister and Chrystia Freeland and the cabinet made a decision to do something radically different, like injected huge liquidity. Like 20% of our country was mortgaged so that we could invest $500 billion into Canadians, and they felt it. And so I think a lot of conservatives, look, there was this one group of ladies who made it known to me that if they go to the polls, they vote conservative. But on the particular election in question, they had a bridge commitment. And so they did not make it to the polls.
Right.
I think there was a lot of people paying bridge in the 2021 election, my friend.
Right. So this would have been, this would have been the part of Alberta we weren't hearing about in the rest of Canada. This would have been Edmonton, where people were quite supportive because, we heard a lot of noise out of Alberta during COVID. That's different than what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Alberta is a very unique political environment. And in my own riding, and if you look at those numbers, David, you'll see how progressive it is, right? If the progressive vote holds together and we don't split, then we can actually elect a progressive. And that was our mission right from the get-go, stop the split, and it worked. And look, there's divergent opinions, but if you actually take a look and dig the numbers and look at the polling numbers and the real numbers, like 80% of Albertans were happy with what we did. 85 on some polls. I mean, look, you don't invest billions of dollars in a community to keep it alive without people going, oh, we understand. And I can tell you, this is one shoe store in downtown Edmonton, Kunitz Shoes. And they came to me after, it was like Community League Day. And it's the two siblings now that inherited it from their grandparents and their parents. And they said, we've paid our taxes for 90 years. And we've never needed the government like we needed the government during COVID. And you were there. And we'll pay our taxes for the next 90 years because you saved our family business because of it. Like, brings tears to my eyes when I think about that stuff, because there are so many people in our community that need that help, and we were there. And that's why I came back, because it was not fun to lose an election, man. I've won and I've lost, and I can tell you. You
think you're going to tell me? You think you're going to tell me about losing elections? Man, you're an amateur. You're an amateur at losing elections.
You have the scars to prove it, my friend.
I've always had a particular anxiety around endings. I don't like them. A lifetime in politics will do that to you, but maybe the die was cast on November 28th, 1976. 64th Grey Cup game, and my beloved Riders, on a loose spiral from Tommy Clements to Tony Gabriel, lose to Ottawa with 31 seconds left in the game. Ted Provost bites on Gabriel's fake, and a 14-year-old Herle, along with the rest of Saskatchewan, gets crushed. But here's an ending I need to be on my game for. We've been talking for 10 weeks about a single subject because it's that important to our presenting sponsor, TELUS. Network resilience and reliability. It's embedded at the core of their culture because, let's face it, it's existential to TELUS. I mean, without that, what have you got, eh? This is the final installment of that story. I've talked about how they invest billions of dollars to build differently, more reliably than many of their competitors. And I've talked about how TELUS team members respond as human beings, going above and beyond to keep other humans connected in the face of windstorms, atmospheric rivers, COVID, and all manner of natural disasters. But it seems to me this is the crux of it. The ability to connect is far more than the wires and wireless hubs, the download speeds, cell sites, and other technologies. There's an us at the end of TELUS, and that's what it's about for them. The way we can give our support to loved ones when they need it the most. How we can better access our own medical care and information. The way we learn and teach and take advantage of an expanded world of educational opportunity. How small business in our remote communities can reach new markets and customers. Herle Burlyites, when it comes to resilience and reliability, you can think about the connection. And you can think beyond the connection to what's at the heart of it. TELUS does. That's something that's not going to end. So, speaking of taxes, I've got some questions about the budget. You up for it?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So, the budget was positioned as being, among other things, about affordability. And the affordability measures are pretty modest in there. By the government's own admission, very targeted at certain income groups and not broadly based. Could you just give me a flavor of what was the considerations that you were going through when you were deciding what the affordability package could look like?
Sure. And I do love your show, David, because you allow people to, practice politics in full sentences. Like there's no 30-second question period answer here, or even something that I can put on a tweet. It was really clear that right now we had to land this budget between two goalposts, back to your Elks analogy and your Riders analogy. Well, number one, AAA credit rating. Okay. We had to preserve the AAA credit rating in part because we've got debt, and we talked about the debt before, and we do have the lowest borrowing charges on the most recent debt in Canadian history. But it's not just about the AAA credit rating from a debt servicing charge perspective. It's from that badge says to foreign direct investors that these are good economic managers. And so it's us, it's the UK, it's us, the United States, Germany, Netherlands, Australia, part of the AAA credit rating club. That's goalpost one. Goalpost two is do no harm on inflation. Because last year, 8.1, too high. Now 5.2, too high. Tiff's Macklem's got a job to get inflation to between 0 and 2%, which I still think is achievable. And we can't put so much stimulus into the economy that he's going to go jack the rates. That would be politically foolish, but morally and economically extremely unwise. And so, look, if you take a look at the grocery rebate, $2.5 billion in isolation, yeah, it's a small ticket item. But take a look at the $13 billion on dental over the frame, or the fact that we did $30 billion in childcare in budget 21 to literally change the way that we have participation of women in the workforce. Right. I've got some numbers for you. Before that program, 69% of Canadian women were in the workforce, adult women. The US was at 77. Our numbers as of a month ago, 85.7% of adult Canadian women in the Canadian workforce within 2 years. That's the difference that childcare makes. And so those Amazing. Are the two frames. Those are the two goalposts. Okay. So, and the other thing is, if you go back to like Jean-Yves Duclos, I will remember this man. He's my doppelganger. He's a head taller than me, and media sometimes swap our name, but he was the architect of the Canada Child Benefit. Like in my riding of Edmonton Centre, and this riding right here of Kelowna Lakeshore, $40 to $50 million comes in every year, goes right into the pockets of parents with families, and guess where that money stays? Locally. And so that for me is the kind of, if you take a look at the whole arc of our time in government, those are the affordability measures that we put on the table. And look, people are nervous. Like this grocery rebate is going to go to 11 million people. And Christia said it very clearly. So is the PM. Like we simply cannot, with the fiscal frame we have right now, take away all the pain that people are feeling on inflation, which is why seeing the economy, have a, call it what you want, shallow recession, mild recession, it needs to take place so that we can see inflation come down, so that TIF can bring rates down. And then we'll be in a framework. And look, on the other side of that is nothing but opportunity. Like, I don't know, I'm assuming you listened to President Biden's speech in the House.
I did.
He's got the US military putting money into Canadian companies to go and help us find, extract, and eventually refine critical minerals, because this computer might have 20 grams of rare earth minerals. My phone, 8 grams of rare earth minerals in it. The average EV car, a kilogram of critical minerals in it. And guess who has more than Asia combined? All of Asia combined, we do. So selenium, palladium, words that I didn't know before I was in this job, lithium, and we're going to go and get those, and it's billions of dollars to do it.
You could have just made all those words up, and I wouldn't be able to fact check you, by the way.
Look, there's 39 of them. Canada's got 13 of the most critical. And there was this article, I think it was in the Edmonton Journal just yesterday, this guy that's from Saskatchewan, splits his time between Saskatchewan and the US. And he said, Western Canada, you were sitting on $1 trillion and it's not oil and gas. And he went into the whole reason why he is buying companies, he is making investments because he sees that future. And that's what the rest of this budget is about, David. It's making sure that we stay on the train to the 21st century. And it's about jobs, but it's about careers. So I'm going to speak more slowly now because I get really jazzed about.
No, it's fantastic. But I want to get to the economic growth part of the budget in a second. But first of all, I have a weirdly specific question for you on the affordability stuff, and it's because I care about it. And that is food insecurity. And there was an expectation in some quarters that there might be a school food program in the budget because it's been promised by the government. It's in a mandate letter, and food insecurity has obviously been badly exacerbated during first COVID and then this inflationary period. Why did you decide not to move on something like that?
So I'm going to give you the long form answer, and I won't BS you ever, because that's not who I am. We had to make some hard choices in this budget, and I'll give you a sense of the scope, David. This is, if I do the rough math of just what cabinet asked us for, okay? Not what all the stakeholders and everybody else wanted. What's in the budget is 1/10 of the ask. So we're talking like north of 400 billion worth of asks now to people, my colleagues, who got nothing in this budget, and there's a lot of them, and to people whose mandate letters are not yet fulfilled. The supply and confidence agreement that we have with the NDs means that we have 4 more budget documents, right? We've got Fall Economic Statement 23, Budget 24, Fall Economic Statement 24, and Budget 25. My sense is that we will be able to make good on this promise with the school food program and others. And we had to just keep it narrowed this time so that we didn't stoke inflation, because the people you're talking about are most affected by inflation. I want to see school kids fed too. That's why we leaned in on the dental piece, right? Because look, you shouldn't be able to tell how much money somebody makes by the quality of their smile. Like, we could tell at school. Like, I had bad teeth growing up. My parents didn't have enough money for the dental stuff. I know what that feels like. And I don't want to know how much money somebody makes because their kids didn't go to the dentist. That's not fair. And we are a more compassionate society than that. Like, coming from Saskatchewan with, Tommy and the fundamentals of the healthcare system, it's a piece we missed. And so we're tacking it on now.
Okay, so let me come right at you.
Oh, I like it. Go.
If there's no confidence in supply arrangement with the NDP, does the government do dental?
Look, would we have done dental? I think over time, would we have done it as fast? Not the first 5 billion, but it's on us to expand to 13 billion. We decided to take it from 0 to 12 to 12 to 18, scope in seniors, and add families with persons with disabilities. I mean, look, we don't apologize for, taking good ideas. I mean, it's the nature of politics, right? Like, I mean, Medicare was a good grand bargain with the NDs, but it took a Liberal government to put it in place. And we took on the docs, we took on the nurses, we took on the whole, I wasn't there, I was a kid. Like, I wasn't even born when these conversations happened. But dental, does it get started off with our conversation with the NDP? Absolutely. But we own this, we love it, and it shows that we're a compassionate government, and the participation rate is there, David. Like, people are taking us up on it.
Oh no, for sure. I know. I've actually, it's actually far more popular than childcare, to be honest, because it affects many, many more people. So yeah, it's going to be political. It's going to be politically very good, and I think it is. I think it is a good thing to do. What I was really trying to understand, Minister, is the nature of this relationship with the NDP on these kinds of issues.
Yep.
And in general, would you characterize it as like-minded people having harmonious discussions, or people with different objectives that are in some tension with each other?
I'm not around the SACA governance table. That's Pablo and Dominic and Ruby, Sahota, and then into 3 New Democrats. But I can tell you it's definitely an alignment of interest. And look, we wouldn't have had a 27-item agreement if we didn't think we could do it together, right? And so, I mean, there are things like, replacement workers that make sense to us. So it's on the list. Like, there are issues with labor. And look, I was with 17 labor leaders, and Gil McGowan introduced me. I ran against Gil in 2015. And there he is saying, look, the Libs have delivered. They delivered on dental. They delivered on the prevailing wages in the tax credits. And so I actually think that what you have here is a moment in time when Look, let me go back because I remember the Sunday night when we all got convened on cabinet to have this conversation. And I'm like, it's a Sunday night. What the hell are we having a cabinet meeting for? And okay, so I'm in my office, like, and the PM's there, and he's got this, glint in his eye, and he's like, we're about to announce an agreement with the New Democratic Party that will, stabilize this government until 2050. And I'm like, in my mind, already doing the countdown that I've got a year left of my job, and I've got to do all my mandate letters. And I just went, like masterstroke, like reform the Senate, pretty awesome, right?
Right.
I talked to 1 million Canadians during the campaign, pretty awesome. But this at a time, remember where we were. We were just getting through the convoy.
Yeah.
We were facing down the beginning of the war in Ukraine. And everybody on my doorstep is like, there's just too much craziness going on. We're still coming out of COVID. And this just took all the anxiety. Like I felt the temperature change in Parliament Hill. Yeah. And I said to my team, get me to the most New Democrat part of my riding, because I'm going to go knock doors when I'm home on Saturday. And I went and I asked them, I said, what do you think? And they all did this. Like, we sent you, give me a thumbs up. They said, we send you to Ottawa to get things done. We don't want to see an election in the next year. Go do your job, deliver for us, and act like adults and work together. Whether you're federal, provincial, municipal, work together. And so that's, I think, where we've landed. And look, are these hard conversations? You better believe they are. Are they tense conversations? Absolutely. But are they constructive, and do we get to the right place? So far, yes.
So, a thing happened in the pre-dawn hours of March 26th in Thunder Bay on the western shore of Lake Superior. A ship called the Harvest Spirit crossed the port city's breakwall at 5 o'clock in the morning and tied up at the Superior Grain Elevator. As is customary, the ship's captain was awarded the new top hat that goes to the skipper of the first ship of the new year to dock in Thunder Bay. And with that, the furthest inland port on the vast Great Lakes system emerged from its winter hibernation and went back to business. Cargo began flowing once again through its grain terminals. The Great Lakes system, thousands of miles of rivers, locks, lakes, canals, and ports, is supremely vital to the economies of Eastern Canada and the United States. Thing is, the water is fresh, so it freezes. The last ships of the season tend to depart Thunder Bay in late December, after which everything ices up until late March. The Harvest Spirit, the first ship to return this year, took on more than 14,000 tons of canola Sunday and headed off that night bound for Windsor. There are several other major port cities on the lakes, of course, and ships carrying grain from Thunder Bay visit them all. Some keep going, heading up the St. Lawrence Seaway to Montreal, Quebec City, the Maritimes, and then Europe or Africa. Our sponsor, CN, has tracks leading directly from Western Canada to Thunder Bay, and the spring reopening signifies the return of blessed balance. Prairie grain farmers have been producing record crops in recent years, and the Great Lakes system is the perfect alternative to the Port of Vancouver, which, to put it bluntly, is overloaded. CN has been setting records too, moving grain east and west from the prairies. When our supply chains are fully open and all their participants are cooperating, it's a beautiful thing. And as we have all seen in recent years, utterly crucial. CN moves cargo, moves it on time, and moves it safely. Count on it. All right. I wouldn't be a son of Paul Martin if I didn't ask you a tough question about the Fisc, and so it won't be too tough.
Go ahead.
It's really just this, Minister. It's not a tough question. It's the fiscal track deteriorated somewhat in this budget, but not in a way that seemed to alarm most observers. I mean, there's some economists that are unhappy, but there's really no outcry about the government's fiscal track, and there seems to be general confidence that it can afford its commitments going forward. So that's not really at issue. But we are in a now sort of uncharted territory of trying to find a fiscal anchor. Mm-hmm. And I'm certainly not one that would argue that a balanced budget ought to be the fiscal anchor, because that's bad economics, and it would make for bad policy. So that's not the fiscal anchor I'm looking for. But I wonder, just on a personal level, what kind of fiscal indicator would make you uncomfortable? What level of debt or deficit would make you start to say, that's concerning?
I watched what you had to work through with Prime Minister Martin and Chrétien, and with Anne there and Ralph there. And I was just on a panel with Anne a couple of days ago at the Edmonton Chamber, and she was a lot tougher on me than you've been today. I can tell you that much.
Yeah.
In fine,
she's like that.
She's a barracuda. But look, I worked on all of her campaigns. I was nervous at 50% debt to GDP ratio during the pandemic. Like, think about it. Let me get the math right. We were 31% debt to GDP ratio heading into the pandemic.
Yeah.
And we literally mortgaged 20% of the country's wealth to get us through.
Yeah.
Was it the right thing? Yeah. 830,000 more jobs since the pandemic. We're at 112% recover, 126. The Americans are at 112. Like, we're seeing, look, even today, 35,000
of jobs that are recovered. You mean where? Yeah.
So we're at 126% of pre-pandemic job levels. The US are at 112. We had 35,000 jobs posted today, like for last month today, and most of them are private sector jobs. So where am I going with this? We're back down to now 43% debt to GDP ratio. And look, part of the fiscal frame is the anchor's been lifted because the economy shrank, and so the denominator's off, right? That happened in 2008. That happened in 2016. I think if we still see these strong growth numbers, you might see in the fall economic statement where that second year where the debt to GDP ratio is still off actually comes back into alignment. The other number to watch, David, and to your listeners, to the Herle Burlyites, is over the frame, no more than 1% of GDP. Why does that matter? Go back to the AAA credit group. USA right now, 5% of their GDP is their deficit this year, and they have a $13 trillion economy. Germany's at 3%. Australia's at 1.9%. And so we are literally the best fiscal managers.
Well, the U.S. gets to break all the rules because they're the reserve currency of the world, right? So they're exempt from all the rules the rest of us have to play by, right?
Let's go to the EU then. So when we meet with Christine Lagarde, who's the head of the European Central Bank, and we walk her through the numbers, she's like, "Are you guys kidding me? Every member of the EU would give the shirts off their back to trade balance sheets. So keep doing what you're doing." I am a fiscal hawk. I'm an Albertan Liberal. Look, you want to go all the way back, David? I paid money as a parliamentary guide to go to Calgary to support Paul when he was up against Jean. Like, that's how far back you got to go to find me. Like that's my DNA. And I think I got the job that I have because of that DNA. I am one of the wealth generators in cabinet. Like, go back to the Students' Union story. You can't spend unless you have. And to have, you got to generate. And we don't, like, governments, the best we can do is put the right framework in place and get out of the way of business and let them do it. And that's how we get to 830,000 jobs created. So anything over 50% gets me nervous, but let's go back to where Paul and Jean were. The IMF was knocking at our door when they were at 69%. At 70%, they would have come in and said, "We're going to help you manage your country." So we're not going to go back to those days. And what we're also not going to do is 27% mortgage interest and 42% credit card interest, because I saw my parents live through that. And we're not going to go back there.
Right. Okay. The most exciting thing in the budget, probably, because I'm a nerd, were the tax credits for clean energy investment.
Yep.
Right? I am a nerd. I have to be. Right? I'm a mutant. Saskatchewan Liberal, the whole thing. But in any event, big number attached to this, could be as much as 80 billion over the next 10 years in terms of refundable tax credits for clean energy projects. In a big macro sense, what do you expect these things to accomplish?
I like that. I like the phrasing of that question. I was at the Kelowna Chamber earlier today, and I was at the Edmonton Chamber earlier this week. I think it's making sure that we lay down the building blocks so that, you know, our kids, grandkids, and quite frankly, workers right now have access to those good jobs in the clean tech industry. And it's not just about clean tech; it's Pathways. The Pathways Alliance, which is most of the big oil and gas producers, we're ahead of where we were as a government on getting to net zero. And there is no way to get to net zero without the oil and gas companies. Why is that? We need the billions of dollars they have in their coffers to invest in carbon capture, use, and storage so that we can actually scrub carbon out of the air and decouple carbon from growth. So for me, it's build the economy to the future, help the workers see the jobs right now, but also give Canadians hope that that we're doing the right things and we've made the right investments. And if you go up to my street in Inglewood in Edmonton Centre, you can have 4 electric vehicles on the block. The 5th one burns out the grid. There are provinces that have had to say no to foreign direct investment because you cast out 7 years, they don't have enough electricity. I thought labor was the great constraint until we started looking at the numbers, and it turns out electricity is the great constraint. And we already have 84% of our electricity that's renewable and coming from a GHG low source. And so we've got to double or triple the grid and do so by 37. And so that's where like 43 billion of the 80 billion you mentioned is to green the electricity grid. And we scoped in public sector utilities. Like I was with Capital Power. I saw people from NMAX. They're like, you have now just fast tracked our entire capital build by 5 to 10 years. And yesterday I was at Heidelberg Industries, which is a cement plant in Edmonton. And they were announcing a $1.36 billion investment to have the world's first 100% net zero cement plant. And the North American president, Chris Ward, came to the podium, and after Francois Philippe, gave his rousing speech, and he said, we're here because we saw in your budget that the tax credits are real. And we're going to work with Enbridge, and we're going to peel off the carbon from our process, and we're going to send it in a pipe off to Wabamun. But the reason we're making this $1.36 billion investment is because your government sees the future, and so do we. And we made a decision as a company to get to net zero, and you're going to be our partners in getting there. So the budget is literally unlocking the keys to that future. Look, Air Products, we announced that a little while ago, but Air Products is setting up in Northeast Edmonton the largest net zero hydrogen plant in the world. And they're just getting started. They want to set up in other places in Canada. So you add that, Bay du Nord, like take a look across the whole chain, right? We just approved Cedar LNG. And if we want to talk about how fast projects are being approved now, we have Marathon Palladium in Northern Ontario from conception to cabinet approval, 2 years, 96% approval of the local Indigenous community. And they're in business. They're starting the mine because we were able to do environmental review at the same time. So what does the budget tell us? That we're on the train to the future. And guess what? We've been on this train since 2015. I know people are making comparisons to the what is it called? The Inflation Reduction Act in the US, Joe Biden, right? Well, before Joe Biden, there was another guy who didn't do a lot on environment, didn't do a lot on labor, did nothing for women. And so Joe and team have got to make up for 4 lost years. They've got to prime the pump. So they got $2 trillion. You add our 120 billion that we spent up until now, and the 80 billion in this budget, 200 billion from Canada, 2 trillion from the US, it scales. And Gail McGowan again, Alberta Federation of Labor president, in front of his members and others said, we think the government got it right, that this is the right way to lean into the future.
Okay. Does finance have any estimates about how many jobs these tax credits, the projects driven by these tax credits, are expected to create?
There is a model. I don't have that number with me because it's gonna depend on a couple of things. How many of these companies come, and it's gonna be heavy automation, so that's one thing. But the construction jobs are off the chart. I'll give you an example. So there are these tax credits. There's also the Strategic Innovation Fund. I'm very interested in our ability to land a project called Path to Zero from Dow. That'll be in the industrial heartland of Alberta. And it just blows my mind. It's an ethylene cracker, and it's net zero, and it scrubs 2 million tons out of the atmosphere. So what's that the equivalent of? 600,000 cars off the road. It would be 30 million person hours of work. And that number comes from the Alberta building trades. So 30 million person hours of work is the biggest thing we've built in Alberta since the expansion of the oil sands. Right. And that's just one example. Like Bromont, Quebec, doing the assembly of the motherboards and the chips. Like it goes from Albany, New York, up to Bromont, Quebec, goes back down. Like that kind of cross-border integrated economy is what we want to see. And look, go right back to what we talked about earlier about the war in Ukraine. Like the world changed on February 24th, 2022, and supply chains are changing. Every time I talk to a Japanese, a South Korean, a German tourism counterpart, they're talking about more flights here because they want to work with Canada. Like trade literally leads travel. And so what we have is what the world wants. And this budget unlocks the ability for those companies to come and set up shop here. And I really think that, like, we're seeing it already, and I'm really bullish on the future for Canada.
Awesome. Cool. Now, in addition to those tax credits, there's things like there's the direct investment attraction work that Minister Champagne is out there doing. And boy, he seems active on that front. But something like the Volkswagen plant, I hear a very large number attached to that when it comes to federal and provincial incentives to Volkswagen to settle in Ontario. And I presume that there's a number of those things going on. Where is that in the budget? Where do I find the money for Volkswagen et al. In the budget?
So it's a really good question, and it comes from, you're right, it comes from, money like the Strategic Investment Fund. And because there are so many of these projects going on at the same time, this is when I'm going to put on my Associate Minister of Finance hat and say, it's like the companies will reveal that once deals are concluded. Because if we say today it's X for Volkswagen, and then, another company is going to want the same.
Yeah, no, I get it. And you don't have to explain that to me. I get it. Yeah. I get it. I'm not comfortable with it, but I get it.
Yeah.
But I will say, I'm trying to get a handle on what's the scope of that piece of industrial policy compared to the tax credit piece of industrial policy. Are they equivalent in size and scope, or are the tax credits larger or smaller than the direct industry attraction piece?
Yeah, the direct. So it's a whole basket of things, right? And in terms of the 80 billion that you mentioned, there's going to be a multiplier effect there, right? We're not putting on 80 billion to get 80 billion. We're putting that money to have a lot more. And look, the Volkswagen plant, they'll be able to reveal, the deal that they have with us over time. It's 1 million EV batteries a year. Like, that guarantees our foothold in the North American value chain for a very long time. I didn't want to see that going to Oklahoma. It was very close, a very narrow thing. But these are the kind of the investments that are at scale now, and it's why we're going toe to toe with the Americans. And in the Volkswagen case, it's the first time they've built a plant outside of EU. It's going to transform St. Thomas, Ontario, and we're seeing those kind of investments across the country. And look, when it comes to being a Westerner, I push Francois Philippe all the time. I know what my GDP is for my province. I know what the population is, and I say, look, you've got to land those investments so that they're proportionate to population and GDP. So my job as a regional minister is to make sure that those investments happen across the system. And look, at some point, Volkswagen will share the kind of partnership that we're in, but it's all part of this, making sure that we're on the train to that future that we talked about. Great.
Okay, one last question about the budget, really, and that is, Poilievre is going to characterize the government's spending over the term of its time as one of the major contributors to the cost of living increases that are going on and to the inflationary spiral. He has some advantages in this argument, in that whether he's right or wrong on the cause and effect relationship, he predicted it. He predicted inflation when others were denying it, including people in the government and in the Bank of Canada, etc. So I believe that out there in the YouTube world, he's got credibility on this subject. And I'm interested in how you respond to it.
I think people saw inflation coming. I don't think they realized how persistent it was going to be. And I think there was some, I wouldn't say hedging, but maybe hedging of bets in terms of not wanting to alarm the public. That said, he also said that the best hedge against inflation is to invest in crypto. Right. And so Bay Street, just like, that's it.
So a mixed record. Sure. A mixed record.
Mixed record. And look, I quote Stephen Polos, who's like, look, none of the spending in the pandemic was inflationary. And look, even Kevin Page is no friend to us. Remember, like, parliamentary budget officer, he's the former head of the PBO. And guess what? He says, look, this budget is fiscally restrained, maybe for our version of liberals, but he said it's sustainable and it's responsible. That's Kevin Page. That's not my language. And look, I think Pierre's going to continue to be angry. I don't know that you can be angry for 2 years, all the way to an election. And on this issue, inflation is going to keep coming down. So the argument won't hold, right? If we continue to see these kind of reporting periods and we get to 3% by the summer, closer to 2% by December, we start seeing rates come back, his argument doesn't hold water.
All right. So two prairie boys like us talking, people are going to expect us to talk a little bit about oil and gas.
Yep.
And I'm just going to ask you because I don't understand really. And I'm so supportive of what the government's trying to accomplish on climate change. I really am. Yep. I know people are skeptical because I poke holes in the politics of what's going on, but I am very supportive of it. And I'm probably going to get off this planet just in time, being 60 years old. But if Joe Biden really got my attention when he announced more drilling was going to go on in the north a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, if he can do that, why can't we do that? If he can continue to grow his economy and grab that wealth and still be considered a climate leader in the world, why can't we do that?
Well, look, it's a really good question. And I think you've seen since we had since the war in Ukraine started, we're up, our production is up, right? We're 300,000 barrels more than we had in the months preceding that. There is a bit of a capacity issue for us. We can pump it, but can we get it to market? And that's why TMX is so important. We are wearing a lot on this file. And you want to talk about growing our economy through oil and gas? The best thing we've got going for us is TMX. It's 80% done. It'll be done, if not December of 23, certainly Q1 of 24. Why does it matter for a couple of prairie guys talking politics? It matters for provincial coffers in Saskatchewan, in Alberta, in Newfoundland and Labrador, and for the government of Canada, because we're going to get our world price of oil for the first time. And there was a lot of who for all with the emissions reduction plan. It's an emissions reduction plan, not a production cap. There's a big difference between those two worlds. And Jonathan did exceptional work. So did Stephen Guilbeault. And remember, Seamus was in that file before. And I can tell you, your numbers that you analyzed, because you've had both of them on this show, the work that Jonathan has done in this portfolio when he was environment minister, the work that Seamus did, and the work that the late Honourable Jim Carr, my parliamentary dad, did as special advisor, special representative to the prairies, took the heat down so much we could have the conversations again. That's one of the reasons that George Hall in Calgary, and I'm back, is because they took the temperature out of the issue that swept us all out. And I'm like, you remember Ralph, me, Amarjeet, Kent, all gone in one anger storm over this very issue. So it is about workers. And have you heard about this thing called sustainable jobs, David? Like the hue for all that's with that? It's about jobs in the industry that just get down this track to net zero. And guess what? Pathways is ahead of us. And I mean, it's funny because Alex Porbay came out and said, sustainable jobs, it's 30 to 40,000 more jobs in my industry. Of course, it's a good idea. So it just feels to me like Biden's handing out Hawkins cheesies and we're distributing Buckley's mixture. Maybe it's, look, governments are bad at communicating. I'll be the first to mention that. And look, he's got also, like you said earlier, he can break some rules because he's got the reserve currency. And I will say this, I think that you're seeing us 7 or 8 years into this government thinking at another scale and really wanting to make sure that we lock some big things in. And this is a moment in time. And so we're gonna seize it.
Cool. Well, Herle Burlyites, this confession may surprise you coming from a professional pollster, but I hated math in school. It's not that I wasn't good at it. In fact, I had a natural aptitude for numbers. It's just that math didn't interest me. Could never see why I'd need it. Well, now I do. Because finding a solution to climate change is, at its core, a math problem. Look at it this way. We need to get our carbon dioxide emissions down as close to zero as possible, fast, while subtracting carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. That's the net zero equation, and it's a tough one. In fact, the math gets even harder when we consider how we're going to power all those electric cars we'll be driving and all the clean electricity we'll need to make things like green steel. Ontario's electricity system operator says we'll have to generate at least double our current electricity capacity if we hope to reach net zero. Think of it. That means massive amounts of new, clean electricity, from more wind and solar to hydrogen power and energy storage. The system operator also predicts we'll need more than double the amount of nuclear power as we're currently producing. Canadian-made CANDU nuclear reactors are an energy source that safely produce no greenhouse gases. And right now, those CANDU nuclear plants are already producing more than half of Ontario's electricity, all of it clean and dependable. Doubling that capacity is going to take a lot of planning. Our sponsors at the Nuclear Innovation Institute know you can't just flip a switch to meet that demand. Big energy projects require environmental assessments and a host of other studies to make sure they're done right. That takes time. We need to start that planning now, and nearly 60% of Canadians agree. My polling shows that Canadians across the country support governments doing the environmental groundwork now, so we have the option to add more nuclear power later. Getting ready now is an approach that makes sense, and Canadians are sensible. Because at the end of the day, getting to net zero is a math problem, and nuclear power is part of the answer. Just do the math. So I think I only have time for one last question with you.
Or we talk about tourism a bit and just roll a little longer. So go for it.
I'm telling you, I'm from Regina, and if we talk tourism, it's going to go so bad, this conversation.
We'll come back another time. We'll come back another time.
Won't be allowed on air. I want to ask you just a very small question. It won't take much of your time, and I'm sure you've never thought about it before, which is, what would actually have to happen for the federal Liberal Party to achieve more success in Alberta? Like, what has to happen? What does the party have to change, or what has to change in Alberta? Or what is it possible? Or, like, do you see in your mix of what you did in your riding something that can be replicated in other ridings in urban Alberta? I'm not looking in the rural areas, but surely we should be competitive in more than just two of those ridings in those two big urban centers.
I think it was a very wise person that once wrote an article that the Liberal fortunes run through the urban West. Sound familiar?
Yeah, it does.
I was in Regina, Wascana. I have been to multiple ridings in Saskatoon. So I'm gonna call you on Alberta and raise you to Saskatchewan. Right. There are more seats for us in the prairie provinces. We can grow in Manitoba. We can get our foothold back in Saskatchewan. That visit that I did to your fair city was electrifying. It was so interesting, and people were not just friendly, they were literally saying, how do we work more with the federal government? How do we collaborate? And in Alberta, there are more seats. Like, go back to the election of Jean Chrétien, 93, right? 4 seats, like Judy Bethel, Anne McClellan, David Kilgore. I'm missing one in there.
But in fairness, a collapse of the Conservative Party enabled
that. They broke in two, right? Like they split. So look, our cities are progressive cities. And when we hold the vote together, look, you've seen this in some ridings. Let's be straightforward. Heather McPherson's got a 70+ lock on Edmonton Strathcona because the Liberal vote went to her, right? Yeah. I've been able to do what I've done in this last election, part because of the Conservative vote, but I made a case to progressives to hold together. George Shahal will continue to do the same in his riding. And then there are ridings that we can take to add to our list. And redistribution is going to make this interesting because we're going to see how that settles out. Like, there's some change in my riding. There's some change in George's riding. But watch Edmonton Millwoods. I think it's going to become the new Edmonton Southeast. That is our seat. That comes back. That was Amarjeet Sohi's seat. Yeah. That comes back to us. And there's going to be some work to do, but some promise in both Calgary Centre and Calgary Confederation, and other seats in the urban West that we want to go see. Because look, if you look at the electoral map from a Canadian perspective, we got to pick up some seats in the West.
We do, especially if we're going to eventually shed some in Quebec, which we may at some point.
We might, and look, we might, and things are. Look, I know Pierre's out there; he's hustling, and he's doing what he has to do, and we're going to push back. And look, we're going to have a million conversations with Canadians again and more leading up to the next election. And I was out on the doors. What day is it? Thursday? I was out on the doors Tuesday night in my riding, and it was across the whole spectrum. And that's what I love, because we're in the middle of a mandate. It should be a little frothy, and it's going to be more conversations all the way to the next election.
All right. You have $5 you have to bet. Smith or Notley?
I'm not going to bet. You know that. Whoever gets more than 44 seats is going to become premier, because I've worked with both of them and I know how to work with them. And look, for all the bluff and bluster in the press, like, I probably have half the cabinet's phone numbers in my phone, because the job is common ground, right? And I hear it from the constituents, and we're not gonna do what we need to do in this country without Alberta as part of it. It's the same for Saskatchewan. Like, I want the regional tables that Jonathan Wilkinson is trying to do in both Alberta and Saskatchewan, and we're making good progress on that. Let's talk about the politics, though. And I think now the strategists are going to call me, because you've opened this door. And I think those Alberta boys are going to say, hey, you were with Herle. How come you're not on our show? So now you've got thank you, David. They're going to have some Alberta jealousy now, thanks to you. And even Jespo is going to be, Boissonnault, what are you doing hanging out with Herle Burly? Like, get back on my show.
Oh, no, Jesperson's a big fan, and I'm a big fan of his. We got a mutual admiration for society.
Really
Those strategists are a different kettle of fish altogether. I don't know what they're up to.
Battleground, anyway, that's why I raised them. The battleground is in the riding south of the Bow River. And look, it gets stacked, right? Because in Alberta, you got to win two of the three solitudes: Edmonton, Calgary, rural. But whoever controls rural, 33% of the population starts with over 40% of the seats. And that gives Danielle an advantage, at least now. But
right, because rural's overrepresented. But there should be more commonality between Calgary and Edmonton than there is between Calgary and the rural.
There should be. But is there? And here's the question, because there's been an analysis by a couple of your colleagues and some journalists that in an election in the past, between 250 and 300,000 Conservatives simply didn't show up to vote. And it turned the tide. Mm-hmm. So let's see how the election goes, because that's why, if we knew what was going to happen, we wouldn't need to have elections. So we're going to have, this election is going to unfold, and we'll see what happens. And I'll be there ready to work with whoever the next premier is, and we'll keep building the country. There
you go. Excellent note to end on. Thanks a ton.
David, great pleasure. See you next time.
Really appreciate you squeezing this in. It was a great conversation. Good to talk to you.
Thanks, man.
And, go Oilers and go Riders.
I'm going to come and see a game with you in August if I can. So it's a date.
All right. That would be a blast. Let's do it.
Man. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. All right. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsors, CN Rail and the Nuclear Innovation Institute. I'd like to thank all of you who watched or listened to this program for doing that and for your support, and obviously Minister Boissonnault for giving us his time. Thanks very much, and we'll be back next week with more of the Herle Burly.